right, welcome one and all to Impolite Company on the GCPR.live network. This is the show where we do what has always been said, what you're not supposed to do. Talk about religion and politics and all sorts of other stuff. I'm your host, Matthew Best. Together we walk through honest dialogue, explore messy truths, and try to see humanity in perspectives different from our own. You got a question, a thought, something to challenge, you can email me at contactimpolitecompany@gmail.com. And don't forget, you can see all previous episodes on Apple Podcast, or you can listen to them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and also find us on YouTube. Just search for Impolite Company, look for the logo. And if you want to dive deeper into the themes that we're exploring, you can visit my blog at pastormatthewbest.com. And I always appreciate sharing. So let's get into today's conversation. Today, I'm really excited to be welcoming Mel Brennan, who grew up in Willingboro, New Jersey, and is the author of Saving Soccer, or if you're in Europe, Saving Football. Uh, and it's in the process of coming out, and we'll get into that. Mel served as the head of special projects for CONCACAF from 2001 to 2003 as the North American e-FIFA liaison to the global governing body, and as one of 5 North American delegates to the 2002 FIFA World Cup Korea, Japan. He appears in the Netflix series FIFA Uncovered as one of the small number of former football insiders willing to speak on the record, and the only one from North America. He remains the highest ranked African American in the history of world football governance. A co-author of Sport Revolution and the Beijing Olympics from 2008 with Grant Jarvie and Tony Huang. Mel has spent over 2 decades levying a comprehensive critique of sports governance, the flawed relationship between sport and human rights, and what citizens deserve from their sporting culture. His career spans an unusually wide and deep arc. He began as a confidential investigator with New York City's Civilian Complaint Review Board before moving into general management with global brands including Sega GameWorks, WWFE, and the Walt Disney Company. He has since led organizations across the nonprofit and public sectors, including as CEO of the Fuel Fund of Maryland, CEO of the United Way of Southern Maryland, and COO of Ridgewood YMCA. He served as the Deputy Director of the Office of Compliance Consultants at Rikers Island, working under FIFA versus MasterCard case Judge Loretta Preska. Mel pursued a PhD in sport and human rights at the University of Stirling in Scotland, taught within the University System of Maryland, curated TEDx Baltimore in 2011, and has written on sports corruption for global outlets, including BBC World Service, Trinidad's Wired 868, and Jossamir. His commentary has been noted by ESPN's Gabriel Marcotti and by Deadspin, among others. Mel, welcome.
Matthew, I don't know who that guy is, but he seems very interesting. We should go interview him.
Well,
Uh,
I will say very impressive. Like, reading that background, and something that I should share with the audience as well is that Mel and I are both part of a book conversation group, and so I've gotten to know Mel over the last year and a half or so, 2 years
right,
maybe.
right.
But all of that really incredible. Like, these are things that I didn't even know in the midst of having these conversations with you. So I'm really excited to have you on and to have this conversation.
Well, and I appreciate the opportunity. I mean, that book conversations group that we have is the reason why I'm here, because it created this environment where, I go from meeting you to having these intimate conversations, less about the books really than about the human condition
Right.
that the books serve to explore. And in doing that, come to trust and value your opinion, your thought process. So then when you said you had this podcast, I was like, well, if I could get on that, I have made it. So I really
Oh,
appreciate
there you
that.
go. Well, thank you very much. So I just got to say, I love the book, and this is not just heaping praise on you because you're my guest either. I absolutely love the book. I think I probably read it in the course of like 3 or 4 settings. I just
Wow.
was gobbling it up. it flowed so well. I did not want to put it down. And what I wrote down is it felt like Alice in Wonderland, and I was wondering how far down the rabbit hole we were going to go. And I'm wondering if that's what the hope that you had with writing the book, and maybe you can just say a little bit more about what the book is too.
Yeah, I think you're capturing a large part of it there, which is when you think about joining this global fraternity of this really valued sport culture around the world. I mean, we're sort of lukewarm on soccer, except now, right? When the U.S. national team is in the World Cup, we pay attention in the United States. But everywhere else, this is kind of functions as culture, as religiosity, as it is generational, their experience of soccer. So when you get the opportunity to join a community like that, it feels like a dream job, right? And the ways in which that ended up happening for me were odd, yes, but you thought of at the end of the process in February of 2001, I was like, I'm in a dream job.
Yeah, sure.
Um, and the book is really about the arc of discovering for myself, not only that it wasn't really that, but also discovering that for this global system, this global institution of football, who it was serving and who it was absolutely not serving. And, um, I left there in September of 2003, determined, really from a PTSD standpoint, I was so unhoused by that experience that I went on to these other roles and ultimately this nonprofit career, really centered on the question, who is made or kept vulnerable by what's going on and how do we
Mm,
fix that?
yeah.
That fire was set by the outcomes in this first dream job with CONCACAF and FIFA and soccer. So the book is about all of that, and then there is some prescription at the end. But we start in the book really with the stories, right?
Yeah.
That just puts you right in it,
Oh, yeah.
and try to get people to go, okay, I can imagine myself in these scenarios. What choices would I make? And then we finish with some prescriptions about if you want to fix this, the steps you might be able to take. So
Yeah, and I I appreciate the style that you had with that, with really the stories, right? You're telling the story because you could have written a very different book, which could have been very analytical, going into, the corruption and this, that, and the other thing. But you really, in a sense, humanized what you encountered, right? What you were talking about with this idea of just kind of what would you do in that situation where there aren't nice, easy answers. Oftentimes, you're stuck, in no-win situations in that. So it's just something that I really appreciated about that. I want to ask you this question. You could have picked a million different titles for the book. So why call it fixing soccer?
yeah, so saving soccer in North America and fixing football at the rest of the world. And the idea there was to encourage people who, we have what did Bruce Springsteen say? 500 channels and nothing on. Now it feels like 5,000 channels and nothing on, right? People can do anything they really want to with their time, and they can go as niche in their interests as they'd like. So what would encourage someone to pick this book up, and how does that title continue to tell the truth about what's inside, right? So, um, to your point about how the book was laid out, the first cut at the book was very academic, to your point.
Mm,
It was very academic. The second cut at the book was one chapter was a story, the next chapter was what the story meant academically and intellectually and analytically. One story, one analysis, one story, one analysis. And it was really my publisher, Benita Merciades and Fair Play Publishing, and Benita herself is a whistleblower from the global South around what was happening with the Australian Football Federation. She took that energy and her love of writing and reading and turned it into Fair Play Publishing. It was her that said, you know what? Let's organize it this way, and let's take all of the stories and really all the human drama and let people get into that, and
Yeah.
then leave the prescriptions for the back end and the other conversations that you might have. So I'm really thankful to her and to the editors at Fair Play Publishing who leaned in and said, you know, if you're willing to hustle, Mel, we can get this book out for the World Cup. And I came to them with the title.
Mm.
Uh, and I said, you know, I feel like saving soccer is the conversation we want to have. And this book is the appetizer and the first part of the dinner course in that conversation, right?
Hmm.
So it intentionally um, drives people to the next step, right? Which is to say, you know, hopefully when people read it, they go, "Man, this is crazy and this is unacceptable, and how might I do anything about it?" And then we take the next step.
Right.
Um, and it's a little bit arrogant, you know, it's a little bit arrogant to think that you could write a book that saves soccer, right? But when people really read it, it's really like I just want to play a role
Yeah.
in orientation, right? I use a quote from my father all the time. We were in the car when I was a kid, and I had done something, or I can't remember what I had done, but he wanted to talk to me about it, and he said, "You know, Mel, uh, people say that a journey of 1,000 miles," and I jumped in because I wanted to be right, and I said, "begins with a single step." He said, "Yep, that's what people say," and he said, "Then people would be wrong." He said, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with facing in the right direction."
Mm.
Right? Otherwise, your journey might be much longer than it needs to be.
Yeah.
And he said, so your orientation, which direction you're facing, matters. And you know, big institutions like FIFA are almost like tankers, oil tankers.
Yep.
You know, you're not going to turn that around in 20 minutes and do a U-turn, but you might turn it a little bit,
Right. Yep.
right?
The 1 degree thing, right? Right.
Right.
That ends up
Play
turning it.
exactly. Play your role in turning it a little bit, and then look to the community that you've built to help turn it a little bit more, and then build a community to turn it a little bit more,
Right.
right? And that's what we're trying to do with this book.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So the other question, besides the obvious that okay, it's the World Cup is going on right now, and as you said, North America is paying attention because it's here. Um, why why this book now as opposed to 10 years ago or whatever? Pick another time. Why this book now?
Yeah. So you know, after I left, um, in you know the mess that was FIFA and CONCACAF in 2003. I took my family to Scotland. I was pursuing a PhD. I ran out of money, so I never finished it, but I was pursuing the PhD in sport and human rights out of the University of Stirling. I was living over there. And I took all my papers from my time at CONCACAF with me. And I reached out to a gentleman, probably the most important sports investigative journalist that's ever lived, a guy named Andrew Jennings, who had gone from investigating corruption with the Metropolitan Police to investigating corruption with the Olympic movement to investigating FIFA. And a man I had met and kept out of the CONCACAF Congress in Miami. Um, and the whole time I was keeping him out of the Congress, he was telling me about all the stuff that CONCACAF was doing that I ended up finding out was true. But I reached out to him while I was in Scotland because I knew he lived in the UK. And I said, hey, all that stuff you told me looked like it was all true. He said, yeah. He said, I already knew that. Why are you calling me? And I said, well, I've got all the paperwork to prove some of it. And so I went to his house with my family. My family ended up meeting his family. We ended up becoming friends. Um, and Some of that paperwork, a lot of the work that he did, a lot of the work that the Justice Department under Loretta Lynch did, ended up exploding the CONCACAF criminal regime and organization with a series of indictments in 2015. So we had done a lot of the work to shine a light on the organization, to provide it with the documents, to provide justice systems around the world with the documents that they needed, and to get when you shine light on cockroaches, they scatter.
Mhm.
To get the malfeasant element, sometimes the criminal element, out of world football. But the problem was that we didn't fix the institution itself. We didn't fix the systems
Mhm.
that produced the outcomes that we got. We got the monsters, right? We got the individuals that can be monsterized. Joseph Sepp Blatter, the FIFA president, my boss, Charles Gordon Chuck Blazer, his boss, everyone's boss in North America, CONCACAF president Jack Warner, a bunch of other folks were dealt with, banned, etc. Um, but if you don't fix the institution, and if you don't change the systems, then you end up potentially swapping one group of knuckleheads and cockroaches and malfeasants and thieves for another. And so, we look at the World Cup bidding process. We look at the World Cup revenue. We look at who actually gets what from the people's game. We look at FIFA, which is a member organization with more members than the United Nations, and what the outcomes are for the most vulnerable members. And we discover that we ended up mostly in the same position we were in before, just with more paperwork, more
Mm.
gloss, more shine. And so this book was really about, well, if that's what happens when you deal with the top down, how might we look at the most successful forms of football from the bottom up?
Yeah.
And maybe change can be derived there.
Yeah. I mean, this is really speaking to more than just FIFA, more than just sport. I mean, and we'll get into that. I wanted to ask you also about what the hardest part of writing the book was for you.
I think the hardest part. That's funny because I've explored that question
Oh.
exactly, but never spoken about it publicly. The hardest part of the book, writing the book, was getting over myself.
Hmm.
Right. Um, a lot of this, some of this book is embarrassing. Right.
Sure.
Some of this book is uh, it could expose me to a lot of critical analysis where people would go, well, why would you even be there at all? Um, and to sort of get over myself and recognize that I was on a human journey, right? From this arc of dream job into this arc of discovering the corruption and malfeasance and criminality, and then a concluding arc that for me was, if I stay there any longer, I'm no longer trying to address the issue from the inside. I am part of the issue,
Hmm.
right? And I have to make a choice. Now that arc is going to be different for everybody. Some people might have
Sure.
come to that conclusion much quicker. They might have come to that conclusion after, I have a chapter called Chapter 3, 9 days in. They might
Right.
have come to that conclusion after the ninth day, when you see what happens on the ninth day,
Uh-huh.
right? But I sort of had this arc, and I had to become okay with my arc to
Hmm.
really write the book in a way that I thought ended up being transformative for the conversation around sport, culture, life, institutions. So that was the hardest part, was to not hide, to not
Yeah.
try to hide, and to just be authentic and honest about the choices that I made and the choices that
Yeah.
others made, and to, as a result, have the credibility to talk in a way that sort of was an expose on all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I think one of the things I really appreciate about that is you there's no hero in the book. So you didn't make yourself into a hero. As you said, you're right in the midst of it, and you can when I'm reading it, I'm hearing the struggle. throughout your entire time there, right? You've got the aspirational side, the dream job, the I want to learn all this type of stuff, and then there's the all the junk that's going on, and I can definitely, as I'm reading, I can read the how do I manage this, and how do I
Yeah.
keep going in it. I mean, there's a real struggle that is going on, and how do I not become especially I don't want to reveal reveal stuff. I want to encourage people to read the book, but especially towards that end, that kind of last incident that you talk about, that like that's where the trust was ultimately broken from your boss, that just was like, kind of done with you type of thing. Um, wow. Yeah. Again, in one sense, it almost reminds me of like um, a good fiction, right? Like fiction has a way to kind of capture you, and you get into the stories of the people, and crazy things happen, and yet I kept reminding myself, like, yeah, this isn't fiction. Like this is real stuff that happened, and you're telling the story of it, and real people suffered consequences. Real people were hurt in throughout all these type of things, and so I had to keep reminding myself, like, yeah, this isn't fiction. This is real, and I think that's where um, the whole idea of this isn't just about soccer gets into much larger things. So
Well, I appreciate that because, when I would around the Brennan household, lots of these stories are legendary, right?
I can
And
imagine.
when people tell the story to other people, they go, "Wait, what?" And people are it almost seems larger than life because in many ways it was larger than life. Some of these
Yeah.
figures functioned as larger than life. I remember learning in school about Graham Allison's book Essence of Decision,
Mm.
and that book came from his master's thesis and then his PhD dissertation, which was the foundation for the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard.
Mm. Okay.
This thesis in this book, Essence of Decision, and he wrote it about ostensibly the Cuban Missile Crisis
Mm.
and three different ways to really understand the decision making that took place there that some people say kept us from nuclear war and annihilation.
Hmm.
And the three models of decision making that he offers, one is called the rational actor paradigm. And very simply, it's a decision comes from somebody going through a pro and con list and
Right.
rationally looking at that and coming to a decision. And the other one is the organizational process paradigm. Decisions are about the inputs that go into the black box of an organization. And if you're on the outside, you can't really see, but if you're on the inside, you see the specifics, and the decision is an output. But the third one is called the bureaucratic politics paradigm. And that one says that decisions really are the results of quid pro quos from political players who have people in orbit around them all the time,
Mm.
right? And as soon as I got to CONCACAF, I felt this is the bureaucratic politics paradigm.
Yeah.
This is decisions are the result of quid pro quos and the energies around political players. It has nothing to do with rationality. It
Yep.
has nothing to do with great information. There's a story in the book about China and human rights where they
Right.
get the best possible information and still make the bureaucratically political decision,
Hmm.
right? Because good information, has nothing to do with what
Right.
these leaders want to do, right?
Right.
So, for me, yeah, I think you're right in that it was instructive for the rest of my life in terms of looking at institutions and vulnerability and really trying to understand what's the decision making paradigm here and how do we engage on that to limit the most vulnerable. And we have conversations that are really centered on what is the axiological basis for our thinking, what is the
Right.
ethical, the religious basis for our thinking. And for me, I'm really centered on, and I try to center my family on Matthew 22:34 to 40. I don't think there's anything else that matters in the Bible if we're not focused on the fact that the Godhead said that he didn't just say, "Hey, by the way, love each other," right?
Right.
As an idea. He didn't just give us as a directive. He didn't just give it as a command. He said he was asked, "What are the greatest commands?"
Right.
And he said the greatest commands is to love your neighbor as yourself, include love God, love your neighbor as
Yep.
yourself. And then he said, on those two commands hang all the other law and the prophets, right? So every
Yep.
other piece of scripture you want to engage in to give you direction, and every other prophetic sensibility that you might have has to come through the lens of the doing of love,
Right.
right? And then to make it even clearer, there's a passage in Luke where he's asked specifically, "Who's my neighbor?" And I
Right.
always took that to be because I worked in New York City, right? There's a chapter
Uh-huh.
where I talk about crazy things being normalized.
Right.
And I can imagine somebody from New York saying, "Who's my neighbor?" and really want to know who their neighbor isn't,
Yep.
right? Who is
Yep.
not my neighbor? Who do I get to step over in the street? Who do I get to leave behind,
Uh-huh.
right? And the answer from the Godhead to that question was a Samaritan parable that essentially said, everyone you come across, everyone who comes into your
Yep.
awareness for whom you might be able to exhibit mercy is your neighbor. You
Yep.
know, the baby next door, a Gaza baby, a Portland baby, a
Yep.
baby in the Congo. It doesn't matter. So now, with that as sort of the foundational pillar that makes, for me, my religion matter, I'm looking at, you know, the point you raised earlier, which is at every point, who's harmed or who's made vulnerable by this, and going, essentially, this thing is too big. It's too big a piece of culture for us not to address, right? Because when it's not run right, when it's run by even the people that are running it now, people get harmed, people get left behind,
Yep.
and how can we do better?
Yeah. So I want to take just a moment of a break and offer, I do this with every show, just a couple of things that are close to my heart, and we'll jump back into the conversation. So, first, Christ Lutheran Church in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's where I serve as the pastor as well as the executive director of the health ministries here. We run 3 free health clinics that serve a whole lot of folks. The numbers just keep going up. Since 2018, we've welcomed over 100,000 visits here. It's a whole lot of impact on folks. And I certainly welcome folks to check us out online, christharrisburg.org. And if you're in the area, you can schedule a tour right off the website. I'd love to show off the clinics and the church and everything, and just get a little sense of healing. Second, Memorial Blanket Project. This is every year people from all over the country, and we've even had some international blankets made. People make blankets, they make quilts, and they send them to us. We make a display every year, and to really raise awareness around those that are unhoused and what people are doing to actually make an impact for their neighbors. Exactly what Mel was talking about, and then we give away all the blankets at the end of the night. And so this coming year, we're actually going to be in New York City. Pretty excited about that. You can go, you can learn more at memorialblanket.org. Always looking for more blankets, looking for donations, looking for help. The event takes place on December 21st, the longest night of the year. It's cold, and of course, we're going to a cold location because homelessness does not get to choose the weather. And lastly, if you're wrestling with the heartbreaking issue of gun violence, I want to direct you to American Roulette. It's a book. It's a fictional account of a mass shooting, and offers no solutions, so that people can actually deal with something that oftentimes gets left out, which is the humanity of the situation. Whether we're talking about the victims or the community or even the perpetrator. When we the idea is to focus on the humanity, and then we have a chance to actually address the issue. So you can find that online. All proceeds of the book go to organizations that address gun violence. You can get a free audio book version at AmericanRouletteBook.com. This coming year, it's going to be a graphic novel and who knows whatever else. So back to the
Wow.
show. So That's my little commercial
Well,
interlude.
listen, let me say this out
Yeah.
loud. It's important to say this to you. I don't know how often you hear it, but thank you for doing that. Thank you for, and everyone involved. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Thank
From
you.
the health clinics to the blanket work to the book and the conversation. Um, I've learned just enough about your career to
Yeah.
know that you could be doing anything you wanted to do, but you've chosen to do this,
Yeah.
and we're all better off, and those who need your help are better off for it. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you, Mel. I really appreciate the words, and you know, you mentioned the scripture that drives you, and for me, it's just a couple of chapters after that. It's Matthew 25. The usually the subtitle there is the judgment of the nations. It's you know, when were you hungry, and you know, when was I hungry and you fed me? When was I, you know, all the whole list, and that's really my driving foundation of everything that I do is it's the continuation of exactly what you were talking about with that other conversation. You know, just a couple of chapters beforehand, and here's a way that it actually like lives out in that. So
Right, right.
um, I
Powerful.
want I want to talk a little bit about this. Mentioned this before. So you know, the book is a story about international soccer, international football, but it's really more. Like every time when I was reading through that, I thought, oh my gosh, like you could just take soccer out and insert so many other institutions. Like, you know, in my world, it's the church. Like, regardless of what denomination that we're talking about, the institutional church has this exact same type of things that have gone on. And which is always surprising. I don't know if it's surprising or not. I don't know, but what is it about institutions that have a capacity to do these type of things? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. I think, for me, when you snapshot an institution today, one of the strengths of the snapshot is that you can go, okay, right now, who is best served by this institution right now, right?
Right.
Who is empowered by it? Who are the winners within it? And who is ignored by it? Who is left behind by it? Who is not connected to it? And explore that in the context of, do we feel that that's right? Do we feel that that's moral? Do we feel that that's just? Is there work to be done here? So that's the strength of a snapshot, right? And a lot of our institutions fall within the narrative analysis that you find in the book about soccer, right?
Right.
Which is today we would not be satisfied with who is really maximized by the institution, and we would not be satisfied by who's left behind, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in 1970, Sir Stanley Rouse was the president of FIFA. He was from England, but he was also committed to the regime in South Africa. And he lost the FIFA presidency, rightly so, in my opinion, because African nations said there's a movement around the world that is saying no to apartheid, and sport needs to do that.
Hmm.
And Sir Stanley Rouse took the position in 1970 that FIFA would probably take today when we see their response to conflicts today, which is we're outside of that, we're neutral on it, we're bigger than it, we're smaller than it. Anything to not take a stand on, what's right, moral, and just. When it was clear to the world, I won't play Sun City, right? All the stuff that was happening around South African apartheid was clear to the world, and African nations then played a pivotal role in electing someone else to lead. So you could look at a lot of institutions today and ask the same type of question, right? But the snapshot is not complete, right? Because
Hmm.
no institution is a snapshot,
Right.
right? And institutions come from somewhere with a history, and they have a momentum in the moment that is taking them somewhere into the future, right? And so that when we look at it that way, the question then can become, well, is it getting iteratively better or worse? Right? Because an institution doesn't just arrive, right, in the moment. It has a history, right? It's coming from somewhere. So, for example, the uh, the black church, right? I grew up in the AME church, right? And in the AME church, the the function, the mechanism by which pastors are deployed is one where pastors are moved a lot, right? Pastors often are not allowed to settle in any one church. They are moved very, very often, right? So if this was applied to you, Matthew, you'd just be getting started with your work, and then they'd be take you and move you somewhere
Right.
else,
Right.
right? And my parents, my dad was a trustee in the church my whole life. My mom was the head of the stewardess board my whole life, and I would say, well, why is that? And they said, well, the the idea there is twofold. One is the prevention of ego, right?
Hmm.
This idea of the pastor holding forth and creating this thing that sort of is an institution around himself. We didn't want that. And the second thing is the ongoing distribution of talent. Talent is unequal,
Right.
right? And so if you have some churches that just have the pastors that they have and they're great at their work, and other churches don't get access to that talent,
Yep.
right? Then the whole movement doesn't get built up, right? But the cost was for us was that we might have a pastor who really connected with the community, who was then taken from us for a pastor who didn't connect as well with the community,
Yeah.
right? And so that type of thing was an institutional mechanism that you couldn't, in a snapshot, might feel was felt disingenuous or wrong. But in terms of the history of where the church was coming from and where the church was going, it made some sense, right? There was
Hmm.
some rationale for that. The thing about FIFA, and the reason that this book exists, is because whether you're taking a snapshot or you're looking at the history or you're imagining the future, all of it needs a lot of work.
Right. Right. I mean, I mean, this is one of those things too that if you ask the average person, I don't know if this is true or not, but I think it's pretty well known that a lot of folks, at least soccer fans, know that FIFA is has been corrupt for a long, long, long time.
It's almost the one thing they know, right?
Right. It's the one thing they know, right? And at the same time, knowing this, there's almost this kind of sense of, well, but those people are like really far away.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's corrupt, but they're so far away and we don't really know what they do. And and I wonder about the danger of that because like in the book, you're talking about the amount of money and the amount of political influence and all these things that like I was honestly like shocked by some of the stuff that you had in there as far as just simple things. So this is just a small little thing I'm going to share is like going through the airport and just because you're part of FIFA, you just don't even have to go through the security. And
Right.
like I'm sorry, like what? Like that's just a small thing, but like everybody else has got to do this, and then all of a sudden there's this hierarchy of who's valuable and whatnot. And that's such a small, I mean, it's not small, but it's such small compared to we're talking about millions of dollars. You're talking about political influence and having these type of things. I think so many people have a disconnect between like, oh yeah, yeah, we want to go see this game and we're really excited about it. And then there's the administration part that has real life impact and really affects people's lives. And there's a disconnect. And I think one of the beautiful things that you do in this book is you actually are able to connect those things together for folks that they may not even have tried to connect together.
Well, I
In
appreciate that. Yeah. Look, the 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 idea that FIFA is this sort of hyper diplomatic, hyper ambassadorial entity is a notion cultivated by the guy who became FIFA president after the guy I talked about earlier, right?
Uh-huh.
It's a guy named João Havelange. He's a Brazilian former Olympic swimmer, became the president of FIFA. And what he wanted for FIFA was respect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he strove to position FIFA all the time alongside the sensibilities, courtesies, and commitments that a head of state might get,
Mm-hmm.
right? And after 20 years of doing this, because football itself is so popular, whether there's a FIFA or not, we can come back to that later. But he ended up with some of these courtesies that, you know, you're running a sport you don't necessarily deserve, right? So to
Right.
your point, I could have been a terrorist, right? They have no idea who I was. I haven't
Right.
been checked by anybody, but I'm going right around customs, and here I am in the country, and you have no idea who I am, really. You just know FIFA this way, and we're in the nation. But it's also, it's also the cost for us is also the things that we might not imagine, right? So we arrive, I was born in 1970, right? So I arrive, and sport sort of is the way it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are focused on power and performance sport, better, higher, stronger, faster, farther, more, right? And pushing the human form to an outstanding and incredible feats, right? Through power and performance sport. And we get Pele out of that. We get Maradona
Right.
out of that. Today
Right.
we get Messi and Ronaldo out of that. For the Americans who have won World Cups, but only on the women's side, we get Mia Hamm out of that.
Mm-hmm.
We get uh, Lindsey Horan out of that, right? We get all of these folks, and we don't even process that there's a responsibility for our governing bodies to build other forms of sport,
Right.
right? So in power and performance sport, the cost of that is very often to stack bodies one on top of the other, kind of slave style, to pick the one body off the top and say, you're elite, and to invest fully in that person. And so we get a couple of hundred people like that get fully invested in. But we don't ask the question, what happens to everybody else who was in that system until they weren't successful enough?
Yep.
Or, oh, that system really only works to your 30 or 35. Unless you're a relief pitcher in Major League Baseball, then you might go a lot longer. But you're only in that system to your 30 or 35. And what happens to you then? Or you spent 20 years hitting your head,
Yep.
and oh, there's this extreme variant of murder suicide and
Yep.
suicide in those folks that have been hitting their heads together for 20 years. And what are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
You know, we sort of take those things as things that kind of happen in the course of us getting this other joy at the highest level, when really there's an opportunity for that pillar of power performance sport to be accompanied by a pillar of pleasure participation sport that gives us access to the sport from 4 to 94, from 7 to
Mm-hmm.
107. That is a way to live in the sport that doesn't require us to be messy in order for us to gain any of the benefits from it. But that's a lot harder a set of work.
Right.
But we don't ask FIFA to do it at all.
Yeah.
And when we
Yeah.
say FIFA, to your point, it's not just this global governing body
Right.
in Zurich. We don't ask the Pennsylvania State Soccer Association to do it.
Yep.
We don't ask the Maryland State Soccer Association to do it, right? We don't know what their bylaws are. We
Yep.
don't ask them to function democratically. And in fact, and we can talk about this later or at some other point, but some of these bodies are the most anti-democratic organizations in sport. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You at the very end of the book, you talk about an example of a community focused team, Harlem FC, and I really appreciated that piece because after getting through all of the horror uh, and the corruption and just feeling dirty going through, and then you have this real bright spot of what can be, which I think that's the real my take on this was if we're going to save soccer, if we're going to fix football, you gave us an example um, to get the juices flowing of what can be a vision for exactly what you were just talking about of what's missing and what can be. And I think that the interesting thing about it was, um, and I think this is true again when we're dealing with institutions, is that those things don't come from the top down. They come from the bottom and they work their way up, right? Because this is the same thing that happens with the church is we have all, or this also happens with the way that we treat government, right? We make this horrible mistake of thinking, oh, the people in Washington D.C. they're really smart and they're gonna fix fill in the blank. It doesn't matter. And the reality is they're not going to.
No, they're
They're
waiting
not
for you to tell them what to do.
right. And they're not any more smarter than anyone else. The chances are they knew the right people. The partisan arrangement in their district was set the right way. They had enough money and they got some luck as well in it, and they were elected. And most of the like I worked in D.C. I worked for a member of Congress, and most a good portion of the elected officials, and this is not counting the staff and other folks, have some kind of mental illness. And that's not being rude. That's like
No,
that's a
it's reality,
it's
right?
reality, right? I mean, we're talking about people who are bipolar that are untreated, unmedicated, and these are the folks who are determining policy for everybody else. And we make this mistake of thinking, oh, they're there, they must have the answer. No, and they got way too much to deal with. How can you possibly focus on an answer? So I think that's one of the things. That example that you have was really great, and it's going back to kind of what you were talking about with the quote from Scripture. It's not just loving your neighbor. Now all of a sudden that's localized.
Right.
It moves it from something large and abstract to something localized and concrete and embodied in that. And I think that's that's just something I really really appreciated out of your book.
Thank you. Yeah,
Um, Go ahead.
I was going to say the power of local also is that you can inhabit the change much more quickly,
Yeah.
right? Um, it's later this month that there's an annual general meeting of the Maryland State Youth Soccer Association, and anyone can go, which means you can go, right?
Hmm.
I can go. We can show up. We can ask questions. We can have our voices heard. We can engage in the process. We don't have to petition our representatives, if you can even gain access to them in a meaningful way for something that might happen down the road in Washington at some point later on. We can take action now. Um, and I think um, the best outcomes for the type of sport that we want will happen in that way.
Hmm.
They will be that we lean in and we go, wait a minute, um, how do we take hold of our leagues, our communities, um, our state, and and ask some questions about what we want. Um, the United States is so big. You're finding in the World Cup, people are coming over from Europe and they're saying,
Right.
I didn't realize how big
Right.
the United States is. We are, we are 50 economies, we are 50 communities, and even more than that when you regionalize stuff that
Right.
goes across states. And as a result, it's hard to just implement this broad,
Hmm.
sensibility. Now, Jimmy Carter, with the Amateur Sports Act, was able to institute some things, and we come back to institutions, right? The reason why we have to talk to U.S. soccer at all is a matter of law. Um, but I worked with a guy named Clive Toy, and Clive Toy is famous for having brought Pele from Brazil to the United States the first time he came through with New York Cosmos.
Hmm.
Clive Toy was the general manager. and he made that happen. And I worked with him at CONCACAF. He was the senior consultant there. And he said, one of the things you have to understand is that people at FIFA who are paying attention at all wake up every day in a cold sweat.
Mm.
And I went, why? And he said, because they wake up every day remembering that everyday people around the world don't need FIFA as FIFA at all.
Yeah. Wow.
That tomorrow they could just make another organization and that would be that.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Yep.
and so, and so, you know, to your point, there's a lot of folks there who are a little bit struggling, who
Yeah.
are just there doing the thing, you know, but they're aware that a couple wrong moves and this thing could be on the precipice, right?
Yeah.
And so our job, I think, is threefold. One is to consume content like this book and engage in conversations like we're having now, and recognize the strengths and the limitations of our institutions, right? They come from somewhere, and that history gives them a strength and a momentum that should not be discounted. But today, are they serving the way we want them to serve? And we can ask those questions. The second thing is to uh, dream bigger and imagine freely, right? That the nature of our institutions is not the limit of our possibilities, right? Just because an institution has come up a certain way doesn't mean that that's the way that things have to be, right? So, in the sport context, again, we can imagine doing the Uruguay model, right? Uruguay is 9 million people. Where I live in the DC, Towson, Baltimore metropolitan statistical area has more people than the country of Uruguay, but they have a better sports system that
Mm-hmm.
includes more people than we do.
Yeah.
Um, and the third thing is that everything doesn't have to have a price on it,
Yeah.
right? The moment you put a price on something, the moment that you commercialize, corporatize, and commodify something, you've drawn a line under which everyone who can't afford that price won't participate.
Yep.
And pay for play soccer in the United States, in particular, for example, is the main mechanism by which the most vulnerable get left out and left behind. Um, and so, how do we address that? Well, when I grew up, there was a lot of civic organizations, a lot of people who just came together to do what was right to do, right? And they brought the resources to the table to do that. When I grew up, you could play Eastern Division Little League or Western Division Little League, and it was just there, right? Now, did it cost somebody something? Yes, but they didn't distribute that cost to the most vulnerable. They
Right.
just said, this is part of living in this town. You have access to this thing,
Yeah.
right? Um, and we can imagine that again. Right now, every single step my son takes in sport is commodified.
Right.
Every single move he makes is commercialized. If
Yeah.
somebody is extracting a dollar somewhere along that pipeline, there is no community sport, and we
Yeah.
can we need to rethink that.
Yeah. I think part of that, and I know we're coming up on the end here, but I wonder how much of that too is our cultural attachment to the value of individualization
Mhm.
versus a sense of community. Because, like, I spent a year in Finland, and part of our time was over the winter months there. And I think one of the neatest things was when it's cold enough, the fire trucks go to the schools, to the playgrounds of the schools, and they hose down the playground so that there's an ice rink. And of course, Finland, every kid is born with a hockey stick.
Mhm.
And so every night there would be all these kids who would be out playing hockey and just playing the sport because they love the sport. And this is how the community was supporting them by the fire department coming and hosing down and making an impromptu ice rink where was already a community gathered space. There were already lights there, and they were just making use of the space that was already there in a trusted area. It was really the sense of community in that. It was really, really neat to witness that and to, skate around and all of that. So, um,
No, you make one of the biggest points that
yeah,
there is to be made, which is how do we hold more than one idea
right.
about this thing in our minds at the same time?
Yeah.
Because I believe, to your point, that we are way down one end of the continuum in
Yep.
this commitment to the individual and the individual
Right.
project. And, the truth of reality seems to be that every day, all the time, you and I are both our own individual skill and will
Right.
and 100% dependent on everyone else,
Yep.
everywhere else for our
Yep.
reality.
Yep.
I like to use the example of the guy who has decided that he's going to live in Idaho or Big Sky, Montana. He's going to be a hermit. He's going to be, he's going to forage for his own food. He's going to live this
Right.
entirely individual life. And then Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin goes crazy and he gets nuked anyway, along with the rest of us,
Yep.
right? No matter how individual he felt, he was still in a relationship with these other heads of state and these other communities. And what happens there would still impact him no matter how individual he felt, right?
That's right.
This is
Yep.
an interdependent reality.
Yep.
And if we can get more of that in our lives, in our thoughts, words, and deeds, I think that, and hold both of those ideas simultaneously, I think we are going to produce better institutions, be it better versions of institutions, be it the church, be it sport, be it civic life.
Right.
All of those things I think have the opportunity to become a lot more useful for a lot more people, and it becomes harder to miss the most vulnerable.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, we're coming to the end here. I want to thank you, Mel, for coming on, for having this conversation, for writing the book. There's a million. I had a whole list of all sorts of other questions we never even got to. I
I'll have to write
wanted.
another book.
I know, right? I wanted to thank you also in this book. People might be interested to know there's a whole chapter on the FIFA Peace Prize thing. Thank you for addressing that. I really appreciated that. And people will just have to buy the book. So where can people find the book, Mel?
So you can find the book on Amazon. You can find it, if you're not an Amazon fan, you can find the book at fairplaypublishing.com. Just look up Mel Brennan Saving Soccer, and you'll find it available to you at those outlets. So hopefully, and you can also you can get a paperback or you can get it as an ebook as well. So
Perfect.
um, my hope is that the book is edifying to others in a way that transforms some of the way that they might think about this stuff in their communities. So thank
Yeah.
you very much for the opportunity to discuss it.
Absolutely. And yeah, so please everyone go get the book. It's again, you won't be able to put it down. It'll be enjoyable and it's more than just about soccer. This is really about something larger, but it's looking at things through this lens of soccer. So with that, I hope everybody has a great day and just take care of yourselves out there. All right, be well.